She had ordered the apron 3 weeks in advance. White linen, rosemary embroidery along the pocket. She had the whole morning mapped out in her mind. Golden light in the kitchen, the smell of something already fragrant from the oven, photos she would take before anyone else woke up. The beginning of a Thanksgiving that looked effortless, natural, like it had all come together on its own. She came downstairs at 8 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen was dark, the stove was cold, the air was clean in a way that felt like an insult. No butter, no sage, no roasting meat, nothing. Just the silence of a room no one had been in since the night before. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she saw it a small glass sitting upside down in the center of the kitchen table, and beneath it, a piece of yellow paper folded in half. She walked over, lifted the glass, read 4 sentences, and for a full 30 seconds, she went completely still, as if she was finally understanding something she should have understood years ago. But by then, it was already too late, because this was not a joke, and it was not a misunderstanding. This was the result of 2 years of treating someone's kindness like an obligation. 2 years of turning a good woman into an unpaid servant for an entire family. That woman was my wife. And I know exactly what that note said because my wife and I wrote it together, the night before Thanksgiving, at our kitchen table in Denver, while my daughter-in-law was asleep upstairs, dreaming about a morning that was never going to come. My name is Victor Reyes. I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years as a civil engineer in Colorado. I built bridges, overpasses, infrastructure that had to hold weight quietly, invisibly, for decades without anyone noticing it was there. I retired 4 years ago. I grow tomatoes in the back garden now, and they come out smaller than I expect and taste better than they have any right to. I tell you my profession because it matters. Because the one skill that never leaves a civil engineer even after retirement, even sitting at a kitchen table reading a text message on a Tuesday night, is the ability to look at a structure and ask, what is this actually holding up? And what happens when it finally gives way? I did not expect to need that skill at my own son's Thanksgiving table. Let me tell you about my wife before I tell you what happened to her. Her name is Elena. She was a school librarian at the same branch in Northwest Denver for 26 years. Same shelves, same reading programs, same community. She knew every family's children by name, what each kid loved, what scared them, who needed patience, and who needed a challenge. She was the kind of person who kept a mental record of every person she had ever cared for, because she believed that most of life's problems could be solved by simply paying close enough attention. She was also the kind of person who had never once, in 40 years of marriage, asked anyone to do something she could manage herself. I used to think that was pure strength. I was wrong. It was strength, but it had been quietly mistaken by everyone around her for something else entirely, for availability. Our son Mateo is 36, an architect. He measures things twice and builds them to last. I have always been proud of him, in the specific way a father is proud when a son turns out to be a man of genuine integrity. I believe that about Mateo right up until the year he proved me partially wrong. Mateo met Cassandra 2.5 years ago. They married quickly, a rented vineyard outside Boulder, white candles, 50 guests. The week before the wedding, Elena spent 3 evenings re-sewing the buttons on her own dress sleeves because Cassandra had mentioned offhandedly that they looked a little loose. Cassandra hadn't asked her to fix it. She had just mentioned it. And Elena had listened, and then she had quietly acted, and she hadn't said a word about it to anyone. That was Elena. That has always been Elena. I liked Cassandra at the start. I want to be honest about that. She was sharp, driven, confident, had opinions on everything, and delivered them like established facts. Those aren't bad qualities. The problem, and it took me longer than it should have to name it clearly, was that Cassandra's opinions frequently included opinions about what Elena should be doing, and she delivered those opinions without a question mark anywhere in sight. No, would you be willing? No, only if you have time. Just an assumption, already unpacked, already waiting at the door. The pattern started small. They always do. 14 months into the marriage, Cassandra sent Elena a Tuesday text. Hey Mom, Mateo and I are thinking a casual birthday dinner Saturday, maybe 15 people. Your lamb would be so perfect for it. Not a question, not an invitation. A confirmation that the order had already been placed and someone just needed to fulfill it. Elena made the lamb. She also made roasted root vegetables, a cucumber salad, and an olive oil cake from scratch, because she had once heard Cassandra mention, 9 months earlier at a dinner, that her grandmother used to make one. That was my wife. She listened the way very few people actually listen, and then she acted, and she never made a production of either. Nobody said thank you after dinner. Cassandra posted the table setting to her social media that night. The lamb didn't appear in any of the photos. I noticed. I said something to Elena once about it, carefully. She told me I was being overprotective. She wasn't wrong, but I wasn't wrong either. And I think about that moment often, the way two people can both be completely right about the same situation and still walk away doing nothing. I let it go. That was my first mistake. The requests kept coming. Always the same structure. A statement dressed as a casual message. Warm on the surface. No exit visible anywhere inside it. Can you watch Biscuit while we're in Sedona? Texted Thursday. Departure Sunday. Mom, we need a charcuterie board for the firm event Friday, received Wednesday evening. Small things. Individually defensible. Accumulated, quietly enormous. Then November arrived. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, on a Wednesday evening, I was in the living room reading when Elena came in from the kitchen and held her phone out to me. She didn't say a word. Her expression had that particular quality of stillness she gets when she has already understood something clearly and needs to know if the person next to her is seeing the same thing. I read the message. Turkey, 2 birds, combined weight at least 22 pounds. Stuffing, homemade. Mashed potatoes, 10 pounds minimum. Sweet potato casserole with brown sugar walnut crust. Fresh cranberry relish, never canned. Homemade dinner rolls. Green bean gratin. Roasted Brussels sprouts. Corn pudding. Giblet gravy. 3 desserts. Pecan tart. Pumpkin cheesecake. Apple galette. Cheese and charcuterie board for arrivals. 14 items total. Below the list. 30 guests confirmed. Start time 5 a.m. The kitchen is open for you. I set the phone down. Picked it up again. Read that last line one more time. The kitchen is open for you. Not, would you be willing? Not, I know this is a great deal to ask. Just a work order, dispatched with a start time, the way you'd confirm a vendor had received their assignment. I looked at Elena. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Not angry yet, just very still, deciding whether this was as bad as it looked. It was exactly as bad as it looked. Elena texted back that evening calmly. That's quite a list for one person. Maybe we could share some of the dishes? Cassandra's reply came in under 2 minutes. Oh, Mom, you've done it for years. You're so much better at this than anyone. We'll be handling the setup and decor on our end. Elena read it, set the phone face down on the counter, said nothing. I didn't say anything either, but I was already thinking. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mateo had the family over for a casual dinner takeout Thai, nothing Cassandra had cooked. After the food was cleared, Elena waited for a natural pause in the conversation and turned to Cassandra with the same easy voice she used with difficult patrons at the library. I've been thinking maybe we could order the tarts from Fernwood Bakery. They do a wonderful pecan, and Eli could handle a couple of the sides. It would take some pressure off. Cassandra laughed. A particular kind of laugh. Generous on the surface, completely immovable underneath. She reached over and covered Elena's hand with hers. Elena, this is literally what you do. You're so much better at it than any of us could ever be. Don't stress yourself out. It always turns out so beautifully when you're in charge. Elena smiled, said nothing. Eli, Cassandra's younger brother, glanced at his girlfriend Priya. Priya looked at her napkin. Mateo looked at the table. I watched my son look at the table and say nothing. Not one word. I have to stop here. Because this moment my son staring at the table while his mother sat across from him being dismissed is the moment I keep coming back to. Not what Cassandra said. What Mateo didn't say. I taught that boy that silence in the face of something wrong is its own kind of answer. He had apparently filed that lesson away somewhere between his 20s and now. And watching a man I raised choose the easier version of himself, that was its own particular kind of grief. I kept my face neutral on the drive home. 3 decades of project meetings had taught me that showing anger before you've decided what to do with it is a waste of the anger. Then Elena spoke. That's not happening, Victor. I looked at her. She was watching the road ahead. 25 people, alone, starting at 5 in the morning. A pause, then quietly, no. Another pause. I know, I already have a plan. I looked at her. She was almost smiling. And I want to tell you that almost smile was the moment I knew, not that everything would be fine, but that Elena had made her decision. And when Elena makes a decision, it has already taken hold. That night, she called her closest friend, Gloria. They had known each other for 23 years, since meeting at a librarians' conference in Albuquerque and discovering they shared the exact same opinion about the exact same impossible patron situation, which is the fastest way to become lifelong friends. Gloria had retired to Scottsdale 2 years before. They talked every Thursday on video call. I sat in the kitchen while Elena was on the phone in the bedroom, and when she came back 20 minutes later, her expression had shifted, settled, the look of someone who has made a decision and is already past the part where she second-guesses it. She sat down across from me, hands flat on the table. Gloria invited us for Thanksgiving, she said. Her back patio, her grandmother's roast chicken with lemon and herbs, just the three of us. I looked at her, folded my hands, said, Elena, our daughter-in-law sent you a staffing schedule. Our son watched her send it and said nothing. Gloria is offering you a warm patio in Arizona. I paused. What exactly is the decision here? She exhaled, long and slow, like something that had been held in since October finally releasing. She pulled the laptop across the table. I watched her navigate to the airline website, watched her find the 6:10 a.m. departure out of Denver on Thanksgiving morning. 2 tickets. Phoenix. She looked up at me. I nodded once. She pressed confirm. The boarding passes printed that night. I put them on the nightstand next to my reading glasses. 2 passes, seats 17A and 17B. We were already gone in every way that mattered. The texts kept arriving all week. Monday, just a reminder, rolls need to be homemade. Store, bought is always a letdown. Wednesday, hey mom, make sure it's pure pumpkin puree, not pie filling. Friday, one more thing, Richard and Beth are real foodies. The cheese board should be elevated. Think aged manchego, something with truffle, something unexpected. I read that last one over Elena's shoulder. Richard and Beth. I asked who they were. Elena said, Mateo's senior partner and his wife. I sat with that for a long moment, because that one detail changed the entire shape of everything. This was not a family Thanksgiving. This was a professional showcase. Cassandra intended to impress Mateo's employer to create the image of a home that produced this kind of abundance effortlessly, gracefully, without apparent effort. And the instrument she had chosen for that performance, without asking, without explaining, without a single question mark in any message she had ever sent, was my wife's hands. 30 guests, a curated cheese board, 14 dishes, 5 in the morning. And Elena's name was not on the invitation. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. Not anger exactly. Something colder, clearer. The feeling that arrives when something unfair has been quietly in place so long it has started to look like furniture. If you have ever had your effort treated as a resource rather than a gift, if you have ever watched someone take credit for what you built while you stood in the background holding the tools, you know precisely what I mean. Each text came with no pleas and total certainty. Elena replied to each one with a single word. Okay. I asked her once if that was wise. She said, I'm not stringing her along. I'm just not going to argue with someone who stopped listening a long time ago. I had been married to this woman for 40 years. I recognized her particular quality of calm when she had committed fully to a course of action. Patient, clear-eyed, finished negotiating. 8 days before Thanksgiving, Elena drove to Mateo and Cassandra's house to return a spare key. The front door was unlocked. She stepped inside to leave the key on the entryway table, and from upstairs, she heard Cassandra's voice on the phone. Richard and Beth are definitely coming, and people from the firm. I just need the evening to look effortless. Mom's handling all the food, so that part's covered. I can focus on how the space looks. Mom's handling all the food. That part's covered. Elena set the key on the table, walked back to the car, drove home. She came inside and sat down at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. I knew that look. She told me what she'd heard. I leaned back in my chair. There is a concept in civil engineering, a structural element that a building has come to depend on without ever formally designating it as load-bearing. It holds things up not because it was designed to, but because it has always been there. And the people relying on it have never once had to think about what happens if it moves. That was my wife, in that family. In that house. She doesn't think we'll actually go, Elena said. She thinks I'll show up at 5 in the morning because I always have. I stood up. Then Thanksgiving is going to be very educational. 6 days before the holiday, I called Matteo myself. Elena had asked me not to. But there are things a man needs to hear from his father, not a lecture, not a confrontation, just the truth stated plainly by someone who loves him and is not going to soften it to make it easier to ignore. Matteo, I said, your mother was handed a 14-item list for 30 people with no help and a 5 a.m. start time. She told you it was too much. You told her it would be fine. I need you to fix that. A pause. Dad, I know, but Cass already has the whole thing planned. It's just this once. I had heard those words before, not in Matteo's voice. They had been preloaded. I said, I am telling you clearly. Your mother is not going to run a catering operation for your wife's professional dinner. Figure it out. Dad, I really think you're... I love you, I said. Good night. I hung up. I came back into the kitchen. Elena looked up from the table and read my face. He's not ready to hear it yet, I said. He will be. She nodded slowly. Then she stood, went to the bedroom, came back with her suitcase, set it on the bed, and started to pack. I stood in the kitchen for a while. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, something to do with my hands, maybe. I looked at the stovetop. I thought about every Thanksgiving I had stood in this kitchen with Elena running everything and me beside her, not because I had any skill worth mentioning in the kitchen, but because she should not have to stand there alone. That was my contribution, not the cooking. The staying. Being present for all of it. Not just the moments that required me. The company of someone who was choosing to be there. That was the thing Cassandra had never understood. Not just the labor, the company. The night before Thanksgiving, Elena sat at the kitchen table with the yellow legal pad she kept beside the phone. She had written something days earlier and folded it once. Now she unfolded it, smoothed it flat with her palm, and read it over quietly. Then she slid it across to me. Matteo, we love you, and that will not change, but I asked for help and no one heard me. We're going to see Gloria. We'll be home Sunday. Take care of each other. Love, Mom and Dad. She had already added, and Dad at the bottom in different ink. She hadn't asked me. She just knew. She set the note in the center of the table, reached up to the cabinet above the sink, and took down the small juice glass she used every morning. Plain, unremarkable, the kind of thing you stop seeing because it has always been there. She placed it over the note like a paperweight. We stood in the kitchen together for a moment, light on, house quiet. We're going to hear about this, I said. Yes, she said. Matteo is going to be upset. Yes. I looked at her. 40 years of marriage, and she still had a way of looking back at me that carried more meaning than most people could fit into a paragraph. You ready? I said. I have been ready, she said, for about 3 weeks. We called the rideshare from the front hallway at 3:45 inches the morning, stood side by side with our suitcases. The driver didn't ask any questions. He had a soft radio station on, and the heat turned low, and Elena sat next to me in the back seat with her hands in her lap and the stillness of someone who has made her decision and is simply letting it happen now. The Denver airport at 4:30 a.m. has a suspended quality, not empty, held in place between one version of the day and the next. I bought us both coffees from a vending machine. They were aggressively bad. We drank them standing at the gate without complaining, which after 40 years together is its own kind of intimacy. Elena's phone had 4 unread messages from Cassandra. Sent after midnight, roll timing reminders, a note about the cheese board. Neither of us opened them. At 5:55 they called boarding. We stood in line. I thought, somewhere across this city, 30 people believe there is a Thanksgiving dinner being prepared for them right now. In a few hours, someone is going to come downstairs, flip a light switch, and find a cold stove and a glass on a kitchen table. My phone buzzed as we stepped into the jetway. Matteo. Hey Dad, swinging by to pick you both up around 7. See you soon. He didn't know yet. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. We found seats 17A and 17B. Elena took the window. The plane pushed back 6 minutes late, which felt entirely right. When the wheels left the runway and Denver fell away beneath us, Elena reached across and placed her hand over mine. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Gloria Marchetti was waiting at the Phoenix arrival's exit with 2 cups of real coffee and the completely unsurprised expression of a woman who has known Elena for 23 years. She hugged my wife first, long and without rushing. Then she looked at me. "Victor, you actually came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought Elena might talk you out of it in the car." "She tried," I said. "Elena looked at me once," I added. Gloria laughed and handed me the second cup. We drove to Scottsdale with the windows cracked. November air in Arizona is a different planet than November in Colorado. Warm, dry, carrying something floral I couldn't name. After 35 years of gray Denver mornings, it felt like a deliberate correction. Gloria's house was low and white with terracotta tile, and a saguaro near the front walk that had been there long enough to have developed opinions. A tabby named Cisco acknowledged our arrival from a kitchen chair and went back to sleep. We took our coffees to the back patio, which faced a garden of desert sage and late-blooming lantana catching the morning light in long, pale pieces. Victor turned Elena's phone face down as Mateo's name appeared on the screen. Then Cassandra's. Then Eli's. "I know it won't stop," Gloria said. "It'll stop when it stops," I said. She handed me more coffee. And I want to stay in this moment for a second, because this is the part of the morning I keep coming back to. We were sitting on a warm patio in Arizona watching a garden wake up in the morning light. And back in Denver, a very expensive Thanksgiving was beginning to quietly fall apart. And I want to tell you I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel righteous. For the first time in months, I simply felt like I could breathe. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, where your presence was assumed but your personhood was invisible, you know exactly what I mean by that. At 7:58 inches the morning, Cassandra came downstairs in her new linen apron. That part, Mateo told me later, detail by detail, on the phone from the backyard while the party was still inside. She came downstairs ready. She had a vision for the morning. And she found a dark kitchen, a cold stove, and a juice glass sitting upside down over a folded piece of yellow paper in the center of the table. She lifted the glass. Read the note, set it down. And for 30 seconds, she didn't move. Mateo came downstairs 2 minutes later. He read the note over her shoulder. He told me he stood there for almost a full minute without saying a word. Then he called me. No answer. Called Elena. No answer. Tried the landline, sent texts, called Eli. Eli arrived at 8:20, still in his coat. He looked at Cassandra and said, "Cass, can you cook a turkey?" She looked back at him. "I've never cooked a turkey in my life." Eli's girlfriend Priya offered to find a recipe online. Nobody responded to that. 30 guests had confirmed. The centerpiece flowers had been delivered the day before. Richard and Beth Harmon had RSVP'd within 15 minutes of the original invitation. On the patio in Scottsdale, I was watching a hummingbird hover near the sage. By 9 a.m., Cassandra had called 5 restaurants. The first had closed Thanksgiving orders in October. The second required 72 hours advance notice. The third didn't answer. The fourth was fully booked. She hung up on the fifth without saying goodbye. Mateo drove to the nearest grocery store at 9:30. He came home with 4 rotisserie chickens from the deli counter, 2 boxes of instant potato flakes, a bag of frozen rolls, a pecan pie with a small dent in the box, and at the last moment, because he remembered the cheese board, a wedge of manchego and a sleeve of crackers. Eli tried to make the green bean gratin from a recipe on his phone. He got a text and forgot the timer. The kitchen smelled like scorched shallots for the rest of the afternoon. Guests began arriving at 1:30. Richard and Beth Harmon came in precisely at 2, the punctuality of people who have attended enough work-adjacent events to know exactly how long they intend to stay. Richard wore a blazer. Beth brought a bottle of wine and a smile that revealed nothing about what she was actually thinking. The table looked genuinely beautiful. Cassandra has a real eye for arrangement: linen cloth, white and amber centerpiece, taper candles at every setting. She had put real care into how the space looked. I want to give her that. Then the food came out. 4 rotisserie chickens on her good china platters, instant mashed potatoes with a slightly gray cast in the candlelight, frozen rolls cool in the centers, a pecan pie on the cake stand with the dent turned toward the wall. Beth Harmon looked at the spread, set down her wine glass, said nothing. Cassandra smiled at the table. We had a last-minute change of plans. My in-laws weren't feeling well. Richard said, "That's a shame," and reached for a chicken. In the kitchen, Mateo stood at the counter with his back to the room. He had known it was too much. Elena had told him plainly. He had told himself it would be fine because fine was the easier thing to say because he hadn't wanted the conversation, hadn't wanted the conflict, hadn't wanted to stand between his wife's plans and his mother's limits. And now he was standing at a counter looking at 4 grocery store chickens on his wife's good china, and the truth was landing. Not in his thoughts, in his body. The way things do when they've finally stopped bouncing off the surface of what you chose to believe. My wife and I had Gloria's grandmother's roast chicken for Thanksgiving. Golden skin, deeply fragrant, cooked with the kind of attention that makes simple food taste like a decision. Real mashed potatoes, buttered, slightly lumpy in the way that is better than smooth. A garden salad. A white wine that tasted better than it had any right to. We ate on the back patio as the afternoon light shifted from sharp morning brightness to something amber and low over the desert garden. Then Elena's phone rang, Cassandra's name on the screen. Elena looked at it, then at me. Then she picked up. Mom. Cassandra's voice was 2 registers higher than usual, tight at the edges. Where are you? Do you know what's happening here right now? Richard is sitting at our table, and there is nothing ready. You could have at least called. Elena set her fork down, looked out at the sage. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quality it had carried through 26 years of library work, unhurried, clear, finished negotiating. Cassandra, I told you I couldn't do this alone. I said it 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I said it again at Sunday dinner. Victor called Mateo directly. No one heard us. A pause. So we made other plans. Silence on the line. That is so selfish. We'll be home Sunday, Elena said. I hope the rest of your evening is lovely. She hung up. Gloria refilled her wine without being asked. 20 seconds later, my phone rang. Mateo. I answered. He didn't speak right away. I could hear him outside the muffled noise of the party through a closed door, then just wind. When he spoke, the defensive edge was completely gone. What was left sounded younger, quieter. The voice of a man who has stopped performing and started actually feeling something. Dad. I don't know what to say. A pause. I knew it was too much. Mom told me. And I told myself it would be fine because I didn't want to deal with the conversation. He stopped. I'm sorry. Tell Mom I'm sorry. I believed him. Mateo had never been dishonest with me. He had chosen the easier path, and there is a difference between a failure of courage and a failure of character. One of them is fixable, and I had made the same failure myself earlier in this story, staying quiet when I should have spoken up. He came by it honestly. I know, I said. We'll talk when we're home Sunday. Go take care of your guests. A pause. Is the food good, Dad? The question of a man who just needs to know that at least one table that night has something real on it. I looked at the patio. The roast chicken. The amber light over the garden. Elena laughing at something Gloria had just said finally relaxed. The tension of weeks gone from her shoulders. It's wonderful, I said. Go. Sunday. I hung up. Elena looked across the table at me. I picked up my fork. Roast chicken, she said. Yes, I said. Please. Guests left Mateo and Cassandra's house by 5 p.m., earlier than a real Thanksgiving ends. Richard Harmon shook Mateo's hand at the door. Beth said quietly, Your parents usually help with the cooking, don't they? Are they all right? Mateo said we'd had a prior commitment we couldn't move. Cassandra said it had been a last-minute change of plans. Both true. The 2 explanations didn't quite line up, the way improvised stories don't, when 2 people are solving the same problem from different angles, without comparing notes. After everyone left, Mateo did the dishes. He told me later it was the first time he had ever washed up after a large family dinner. That surprised me for a moment. Then it didn't. Elena had always done it. And he had never had to think about that until that night, which was exactly the problem. Cassandra came into the kitchen while he was at the sink. Told him he should have called us more. He turned the water off. Said, I did call. Dad told me it was too much. She said, You knew? He said, Yeah, I knew. He turned the water back on. She didn't post any photos to her social media that evening. We flew home Sunday. Denver was gray and drizzling, the particular November gray that makes 4 days in Arizona feel like something your body needed without knowing it. The rideshare pulled into our driveway, and Mateo was sitting on our front steps. Not his house. Ours. He had driven 40 minutes to sit on our steps without calling ahead. That told me everything I needed to know about how much he had been thinking. He stood when I came up the walk. He looked tired in the way people do when they have finally been honest with themselves about something and it cost them sleep. We went inside. Elena had arrived a few minutes before me, and the kettle was already on. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had held the glass and the note 4 days ago, the same seats we had used for 30 years. Matteo said, "I knew it was too much," and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I let Cass treat you both like you would always just be there, and I convinced myself that was okay. He stopped. It wasn't okay. I looked at him, and didn't soften what came next. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He had expected more scaffolding around the truth. I didn't have any to offer him. Elena put her hand over his on the table. "We love you. That's not in question. But we will not be made invisible for someone else's convenience. Not even for yours." "I hear you," Matteo said. "Good," Elena said, and she poured the tea. We sat for a while without filling the silence. The quiet that only comes after something true has been said and actually received when everyone in the room has finally stopped performing. It was the best 30 minutes we'd had together in 2 years. Have you ever had a moment where someone finally heard you, not just stopped talking, but actually heard you? Tell me in the comments. Because I think most of us have been waiting for one of those moments longer than we want to admit. Cassandra called on Monday. I answered. She said what you did was really hurtful. I said, "Cassandra, I understand it felt that way. I'd like you to understand that being handed a 30-person cooking assignment wrapped in a family invitation that's hurtful too. We can talk about this honestly. Or we can leave it here. Your choice." Silence. Then she hung up. She called back Wednesday. This time she talked less and listened more. Asked how the trip was. Said Scottsdale sounded beautiful. Said she had been thinking. She didn't apologize in those exact words. But she asked questions for the first time in 2.5 years instead of issuing instructions. And I recognized that as the closest thing to an opening we were going to get. Elena took the next call. They talked for 14 minutes. Longer, Elena told me afterward, than they had ever spoken without Cassandra assigning her something. There was no grand resolution, no tearful scene where everyone pledged to be different people. That is not how families actually change. What changed was more functional than that. An assumption was removed. The assumption that Elena's time, labor, and willingness were available indefinitely, on demand, without question. Without that assumption, things had to be negotiated. And negotiation requires everyone to behave like people with actual choices. That was enough. Matteo started calling to ask questions instead of to deliver decisions already made. Elena signed up for a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings at the community center she had been wanting to for 2 years and kept putting it off because there was always something someone else needed first. I ordered seeds for next spring's tomatoes and told no one except Elena. And one Saturday morning, a few weeks after we got back, I made Dutch apple pancakes from scratch, just for the two of us. Elena poured the coffee and sat at the counter, and we did not talk about Cassandra or Matteo or Thanksgiving or any of it. We just had breakfast. I stood at that stove in the quiet of a Saturday morning and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. The two of us, in our kitchen, with nowhere to be and no one to serve. This, right here. About a week after we returned, Elena found a shoebox in the hall closet while reorganizing. My handwriting on the lid. Photos misc. We brought it to the kitchen table and opened it together. Birthday parties from the 90s. A hiking trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. Matteo at 8 years old, holding up a fish with the pride of someone who has made a permanent discovery. Near the bottom, Elena held up a photograph. Thanksgiving, 8 or 9 years ago, judging by the old kitchen paint. She was at the stove. I was standing just behind her, arms loose around her shoulders, both of us laughing at something neither of us could now remember. I didn't remember being photographed, but I remembered the feeling of being there. Not watching from a safe distance, not stepping in for the moments that required me and retreating for the rest. Just present for all of it because that was where I wanted to be. Because she should not be alone in that kitchen. Because she had never once asked me to stay, which made staying more important, not less. That was the thing Cassandra had never understood, and the thing Matteo had forgotten and had to relearn the hard way. You don't send someone you love a work order. You show up. Elena put the photo in a small frame and set it on the kitchen shelf, next to the juice glass. We stood looking at it for a moment. "We should have gone to Arizona years ago," she said. "We were exactly where we should have been," I said. until we weren't. She looked at me. That's very philosophical for a Tuesday, Victor. I'm a deep man, Elena. She laughed. And I thought, that is what the 40 years were for. Not to produce Thanksgivings for professional networking events. Not to be a resource someone draws from without asking. For this, the two of us in our kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon laughing at something small, with nowhere we have to be. If you've ever been handed a list instead of an invitation, if you've ever been treated as something to rely on rather than someone to love, this story is for you. You don't owe your presence to people who never noticed it. But setting a boundary doesn't have to be a war. Sometimes it's just a glass over a folded piece of paper on a kitchen table, and 2 seats on a 6:10 a.m. flight to somewhere warm. Drop a 1 inch the comments if you think Elena and I made the right call. Drop a 2 if you think we should have handled it differently. Drop a 3 if you recognized yourself somewhere in this story, if you've ever had your effort treated like a guarantee instead of a gift. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you today, pass it to someone who needs it, someone who always does too much, and is never asked how they're holding up. And there are more stories like this one waiting. We'll see you next time. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Denver, Colorado to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.